You would have thought somebody would know well enough that I'm not the type that goes around making up stories. And when I told the managers, I knew she didn't believe me, because her whole attitude said, come on, this is our friend, and he wouldn't do that. I've always felt safe here. Now why don't I feel safe? And somebody said to me, probably because had it happened outside the unit, then the unit would be safe. But because it happened in the unit, then that wasn't safe anymore. I haven't spoken to very many people about it really, because I just didn't want, I don't know, I suppose I didn't want people to think that maybe it was my fault. I just could not eat, didn't want it. I don't know my weight. I think I was probably about 89 kilos. I went down to about 70. Because I'd lost, you could say, a position as a senior nurse, to be sort of brought down to the extent where somebody can come and assault you as though you're nothing. It destroys your faith in human beings.
Just watched part of Margarita's story. Margarita was a 95-year-old woman when she was sexually assaulted by the acting manager of her seniors rental service. And at the age of 97, Margarita led a campaign called She Too, which was about raising awareness of the importance of listening to older women. Today we'll be drawing on Margarita's story and also the research evidence to present to you our very early version of a model for trauma healing recovery for older women and also for people living with dementia.
Before we focus on a model, we'd like to reflect on the historical context for older women, because it will really help us to understand why we are where we are. It was only in 1981 that marital rape immunity laws were overturned. Our current generations of older women married in an era where they didn't have the freedom to say no. They didn't have the right to be free from sexual assault, nor the right to trauma recovery. They put up and shut up. These draconian laws have left a legacy influencing older women's safety and healing. Many older women still believe sexual assault is their fault. Many don't know that what they're experiencing is called family violence, or that there are family violence services that can help make them safe and aid their recovery. The laws were changed, but not the mindsets, because older women were not empowered to exercise their sexual rights. And we didn't tell older men they needed to negotiate sexual consent. These historical legacies, coupled with ageist and ableist assumptions that older women don't experience sexual assault or are not traumatized by sexual assault, provide an important context for our presentation. We want to highlight 3 key barriers to trauma recovery for older women and then present a framework that responds to these barriers. The first barrier is the fact that there is no lifespan approach. It's the first barrier because it reflects the combined impacts of gender inequalities, ageism, and ableism, which really invisibilizes older women and negates their experiences. It's contributed to a belief that sexual assault in residential aged care is a victimless crime. One study found that aged care staff said that in 58.8% of sexual assault cases, there were no adverse impacts on the victim in residential aged care. This in itself is a barrier to prevention and trauma recovery. Just because older women can't communicate the impacts of sexual assault doesn't mean they're not traumatized. Just because older women can't tell us they're remembering a sexual assault, it doesn't mean they are not remembering. And just because older women and people living with dementia don't say no, doesn't mean yes. We need to understand what affirmative consent means to older women. older women living with dementia who can't communicate are targeted by predators, and it is our failure to listen that makes them vulnerable. Our model calls for a lifespan approach, an understanding of the unique drivers of sexual assault of older women and people living with dementia. The second barrier is the fact that there is no collective action. Preventing sexual assault in residential aged care is not just the responsibility of residential aged care service providers. Trauma recovery in residential aged care needs educated and supportive police services, ambulance, acute care, forensics, GPs, sexual assault services, family violence services, judicial systems, and the list goes on. Some residential aged care services in Australia are already leading changes to prevent sexual assault. We've been working with OPAN, the Older Persons Advocacy Network, on a program called Ready to Listen. Go to the website of OPAN and you'll find all the resources there. However, we need to note that sexual assault of older women doesn't just occur in residential aged care. Older women are sexually assaulted in their own homes by intimate partners and other family members and service providers. We need collective action to prevent sexual assault of older women. Many aged care services don't understand how to prevent sexual assault. And many sexual assault and family violence services and all the corresponding services don't understand older women, especially older women living with dementia, and their experience of sexual assaults. Our model calls for collaboration and shared responsibility. Aged care services must build relationships with their local sexual assault service, and correspondingly, sexual assault, family violence, police, and court services must learn about sexual assault of older women, and they have to build accessible services. The third barrier is the fact that older women's voices are silenced. Older women don't feel safe to publicly share their stories of sexual assault as an older woman. We only know of Margarita, who has publicly shared her story as an older woman. Some see the absence of older women's stories as an indication that sexual assault of older women is rare rather than rarely reported. We must break the cycle of invisibility of older women's sexual assault. We have to create safe spaces for older women so they can share their stories. Then they will speak, and when older women speak, more people will understand that sexual assault of older women is a crime we must all address. Our service model calls for all services to create safe spaces for older women to talk about sexual assault and to understand that silence is an indication that we are not there yet. Catherine will now take you through the 6-step service model.
Thanks, Yumi. The first step is around partnerships for collective action. Yumi and I both know that preventing sexual assault and promoting trauma recovery for older women isn't something that any one organisation can do on our own. We need partnerships. The aged care sector in partnership with family violence, sexual assault and the judiciary system and a broad range of service providers is what we need to create real change. The second step is an evidence-based approach. We need guidelines to inform service providers working with older women who are unable to move from their residential aged care service, people living with dementia who are unable to communicate, and also to victim survivors who are experiencing delirium, all have the right to support to help them to recover. In the USA, Professor Anne Wilbert-Burgess, who is a global expert in sexual assault and people living with dementia, is using music therapy to reach victims who can't communicate. We need guidelines to ensure that we have good practices and best practices, and we share those amongst services. The third step is education. We need education on the experiences and needs of older women and people living with dementia, not just for aged care service providers or family violence services and sexual assault services, but across the board. The fourth step is accessibility. This is policy and the physical environment as well. Physical environments need to be accessible to older people who have mobility issues, and we also need to ensure that policies ensure that services are accessible in other ways, that older people who don't have use of technology can reach out, that service forms are inclusive as well. The fifth step is communicating a message of welcome. There are a significant number of services that could be accessed by older women that older women don't know about, simply because of the historical context of marital rape immunity laws and the way that older women sometimes conceptualise sexual assault. They may not understand that what they're experiencing is family violence, but also too because services are not sending messages to older women in their communication, so on their websites or in their online communications. And we need to reach out to older women and people living with dementia to let them know that these services are here for them as well. And we need to be listening to them about what it is that works for them and consulting with them. And the final step is around amplifying the voices of older women and people living with dementia. And we believe that once we have achieved the other 5 steps, that more and more older women and people living with dementia will come forward to seek support for their recovery. And when that happens, we need to amplify their voices, because we have to break that cycle of invisibility, that we're not hearing stories. And so there is this misconception that people with dementia and older women aren't victim survivors of sexual assault. Thank you all for listening today. And please reach out to us if there's anything you think we can assist you with. And also too, for a hard copy of our model, we can send that to you as well. Thank you.